We've just heard about how much tax revenue legalization could generate if it actually happens, but our next guest says that cash might not be so easy to collect. Vanderbilt University law professor Robert Mikos joins us now from Nashville. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Now, GC reported, I know the estimates are all over the place, but most people agree it would be billions both in the cost savings from law enforcement that we no longer would need should legalization be passed, and costs, and also the tax revenues, billions from tax revenues. But you think the number is actually way overblown?
That's right, Lisa. At least on the revenue side, as long as there's a discrepancy between state and federal law, I don't think the state is going to be able to collect these sort of taxes. It's important to remember that even if California legalizes marijuana, it's going to remain a crime under federal law. And history has shown that collecting taxes on illegal activity is notoriously difficult for a couple of reasons. One is that these illicit markets, and marijuana is a perfect example of this, are highly fragmented. So just to think about marijuana in particular in California, there are currently thousands and thousands, possibly even tens of thousands of these mom and pop marijuana growers out there. It's going to be very tough for a state tax collection agency to go out there and actually supervise them and collect taxes from them. And they're not going to consolidate, at least significantly, as long as that federal ban remains out there and as long as the federal government remains committed to enforcing that ban.
Now, you wrote a piece. I'm sorry, Professor Mikos. Let me just interrupt for 1 second because I want you to clarify that. You wrote a piece in the LA Times specifically about this, and you talked about how the tobacco industry is an industry with, what, 3 large producers, but the marijuana industry, at least in California, has a lot of fragmentation. Why can't the government get taxes from these organizations? They just don't have the manpower to track them down?
Well, that's right. If you think about it, marijuana is a ubiquitous plant. It's something that can be grown in houses. It's something that can be grown out of sight. That's part of the reason why prohibition has been so ineffective so far. It's very difficult to find all the different growers and suppliers of marijuana. And that's not really going to change in the short term, at least, as long as that federal ban remains in place, because the federal government in particular doesn't have enough resources to prosecute thousands and thousands of growers. But if you only had, say, 3 marijuana growers in California, much like you only have 3 producers of tobacco cigarettes nationwide, it would be very easy for the federal government to come in and shut them down.
What about the cost savings on the law enforcement front? So if you don't criminalize this, you don't have to put people in prison. You don't have to worry about border control quite as much. That's been a big debate in border control, is the number of drug trafficking that goes on.
Well, it's true. You would see some savings on the cost side. I don't think the cost side is ever going to be as large as the revenue side. So on the revenue side, the State Board of Equalization, their tax collection agency, has suggested the state could collect about $1.4 billion in vice taxes from marijuana. On the cost side, estimates vary. The Harvard economist that you mentioned earlier, who's a terrific economist, suggests there'd be about $900 million in savings. I think even those numbers are a little high, though, for a couple of reasons again. One is that it's very tough to break out how many of these costs are actually attributable to marijuana as opposed to other law enforcement activities. So oftentimes the police will arrest someone. They may find that someone has committed several different crimes, but they chalk it up as a marijuana arrest. So even if you were to legalize marijuana and you took away that basis for arrest, it doesn't mean that the police are suddenly going to make thousands and thousands of fewer arrests. They have other reasons for pulling people over and arresting them.
All right.
And you're also going to have to invest quite a bit of those savings into enforcing all the other regulations that the state wants to impose on marijuana, such as not selling it to minors, such as collecting that tax, such as making sure that all the distributors and growers are licensed. That's going to eat up some of that cost savings as well.
All right. Well, legalization and taxation may sound easier than it actually is. And thanks so much for breaking it down for us, Professor Robert Mikos.